Good afternoon again, everybody, and thank you for waiting. So now we go on with the second panel in this stream one, and this is a panel on energy access. I should check the title. What is it? How do we meet the challenge of providing energy access to all? And I'm honored to be joined by four distinguished panelists. We have Elaine Weidman-Grunwald from Ericsson, who's Director of Sustainability and Corporate Responsibility. We have David Mackay, who you've just met in the previous panel. Richenda, you met during the morning session, and Fatih, you met during the morning sessions. Now, I'd like to start by, I think it's clear that there is an enormous unserved population. That point has been made clear, and it's also been made clear that everybody wants to address the issue of energy access. I'd like to start by asking the question, what do we mean by energy access? Do we mean a very, very small amount of energy for lots of people, or are we more ambitious than that? David.
I'd like to pick up from Rishenda's presentation and show a figure from a company called Azuri, who are marketing self-financed solar facilities for people in India and Africa. So if we could have my one slide, this shows again the tiny solar panel on the roof of an African hut in Sudan, and the idea is this panel can charge up batteries in the yellow blob inside the house, and those batteries can subsequently give you light, and they can charge your phone. And those are both very valuable things that people would have to pay more for, to use kerosene to provide light, for example. And phone charging can be very difficult for a place with no electricity grid as well. And this shows the escalator that the company is trying to help people get up. The idea is they're using scratch cards, using a pay-as-you-go methodology where you buy a scratch card and then put the number from the scratch card into the yellow box, and that's your way of paying off the cost of the system, which stops working if you don't feed it the scratch card numbers. Okay,
but David, let me just stop you there, just to ask the question, at what point on that escalator have we achieved energy access?
Yeah, so that's where I'm going. So if we could have the slide again, sorry. 3 watts is the power from the panel that you need at midday to give that service of light and phone charging. And that's extremely valuable and has impact in terms of educational benefit and health benefits from not using kerosene and so forth. But that's only 3 watts. As you progress up the escalator, you get to the 10-watt panel, which will give you 4 lights, a phone, and a radio. Then, having paid that off over a year, you can progress to the 40-watt panel. That will give you the lights, the phone, the radio, and a TV. And then, having paid that off over the next year, the aspiration would be that people get onto the 80-watt system, which is giving them all of those things and the ability to run a sewing machine. But that's still only 80 watts peak, which gives them an average output of maybe 10 or 20 watts, depending on the sunshine. And when you compare that with the energy consumption of the average European is using 5,000 watts of primary energy consumption. So this is fantastic. This is transformative. But we're not actually getting them anywhere near what a European takes for granted. We haven't got them their fridge freezer, their washing machine. We haven't sorted out their cooker with this particular model, and we certainly haven't given them transportation. In the developed world, about 1/3 of our energy, 1/3 of that 5,000 watts, is going into running transportation systems of various sorts. And to actually be able to run an electric car off solar panels would mean solar panels not this big on your roof, but roughly 100 square meters of panels is what you would need to actually run an electric car. So I think what we're describing here is fantastic and transformative and wonderful, but we must be realistic that if we are really trying to give energy access in the sense of allowing everyone to have a European lifestyle, then we need to go way beyond the top of this escalator. We need thousands of watts to enable the European lifestyle.
Richenda.
I'd like to be a little bit provocative, because I don't think it's a question of we giving it to anybody. I would say energy markets exist. They exist everywhere around the world. The problem is that for very low-income households and communities, they're not very efficient, they're not very effective, and the quality of what they're delivering is not very good. It doesn't really solve the problem very well for the family. So, as I mentioned this morning, a low-income household may be paying up to 30% of their income for their energy services. And the question is how we can, using the energy escalator example, how we can utilize those cash outlays to provide a much better solution. But I would say maybe it's, I don't want to stretch the analogy too far, but it's really an ecosystem of services. It's not only about what we're helping those households to be able to provide for their needs, as I mentioned earlier, about cooking solutions and lighting and other energy services, but it's looking at the application of those energy services for agricultural use. So, for example, the use of solar-powered drip irrigation, which helps increase agricultural productivity and uses the water more efficiently for agricultural purposes. It's using solar pumps for irrigation where possible. It's looking at, beyond that, though, at community uses, so for health clinics, for schools, for providing street lighting, now for helping to improve safety. There are parts of the world where children are going into the community where there are street lights because that's the only way that they can actually see to do their homework in the evening. But it's a safety issue. It's particularly a women's issue as well. We saw after the earthquake in Haiti that there was a lot of sexual violence, partly because the women, as they were going to the bathrooms in the evening, were not safe. So we can provide these community services, and the question is how we do this in a way that really provides the end use for that family and community that can be sustainable, affordable, and better than the solutions that they're using right now, which are dirty and dangerous and expensive.
We seem to have, I mean, there are two strands now. There's still the strand of really what energy access means, which, I mean, okay, everything you defined is within the context of energy access, but I guess one has to consider the eventual ambition. I mean, is it possible to conceive of bringing the world up to an energy consumption level that is kind of equivalent to what is used in developed nations or not? And there's also the issue of the very interesting issue you just raised of whether one's giving or whether it's being generated there. Is this in a way an aid project or is this not an aid project?
I will let Fatih speak more to certain aspects of that, but I would just say that first of all, there are areas where subsidy is still very helpful. It's very, very difficult to bring a solar home system to a family high up in the Andes using only a business approach. The profit margin is just too low. If you're putting the solar system and the battery is actually on either side of the donkey to balance the donkey so it doesn't fall off the mountain path, and you're taking it 8 hours up a mountain path, it's very difficult with the best will in the world to do that from a purely unsubsidized profit margin. So smart subsidies can be helpful, they can be very useful, but at the same time they can also sometimes distort the market. So we have to be, on our policy side, we have to be very thoughtful and very mindful that what we're doing actually really helps serve the solutions and the benefit, rather than distorting and actually undermining the benefit that we're trying to do. And just to say also very quickly that in fact we are seeing that there are definitions of energy access. Within the United Nations Sustainable Energy for All initiative, the World Bank and 11 partners around the world came up with what's called a global tracking framework, where they're defining different levels of energy access. Not to say that it should be the end point, because I think on the other side of the equation, we can bring our energy efficiency much more effectively, so that it isn't this sort of us or them competing. In fact, we can it's a both and. We can really help to provide and support the solutions that low-income communities have a right to, at the same time improving our own energy consumption.
Thank you. Fatih, did you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, of course, there are perhaps 2-3 very quick issues. First of all, when we say energy access, there are 2 hallmarks of energy access. Now, one is the access to electricity, especially for lighting and other electrical appliances. And second is access to clean cooking services. So today we say 1.3 billion people have no access to electricity, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. And 2.6 billion people use agricultural waste, animal waste, wood for cooking purpose. And it is mainly women and children who adversely affected from that as a result of respiratory diseases, which lead to premature deaths. And it is the second, according to the World Health Organization, second cause of premature diseases in the developing world. So they have these both aspects. This is one. Second, when we discuss about energy access, electricity access, we mainly look at renewable energies as a solution. I don't agree with that. Renewable energy is definitely, when it makes economic sense, definitely the countries, villages, and so on should go for that. But it is really, I find it a bit obnoxious from the point of view of the developed world to ask the developing world to use renewable energies only in order to clean up the mess that we have been causing years and years. So therefore, those countries should be choosing from their point of view, most economic option, and I hope in many cases and it can be, especially off-grid sources, renewables, but they shouldn't be only allowed to use renewable energy, they should be allowed to use the most economic options. Let me give you one example. In the history of energy, one of the numbers which impressed me the most is the following. China, in 11 years of time, mid-80s and mid-90s, brought electricity to 500 million people, 500 million people, by mainly using coal. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? So let's discuss on that. If you're a Chinese village peasant in China, this is a very good thing, and definitely. But it has implications for the climate. So therefore, it will be, if we told China, you can only use renewable energies, wind and solar, I am sure today many of those people wouldn't have access to energy, modern energy services. This is the second point. Third, finally, on the subsidies. Now, I mentioned in the morning, and Madam Minister mentioned, today there are about $500 billion US of subsidies on fossil fuels. And we have calculated only 8% of the subsidies go to 20% low-income groups, and more than 80% of the subsidies go to medium and higher income groups. I completely agree with you that there should be some targeted subsidies for the kick-off subsidies for the poor of the poorest, but in general, across the board, giving subsidies may well be a good news for the medium and higher income levels, and it is the case what we see today. To sum up, I am really very eager, because we put this World Energy Outlook since 10 years on this issue. I'm very eager, not the Western countries to impose the developing countries what kind of technologies, when and how much. So I think we should give them the chances that we had in our past.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Elaine, I know you wanted to pick up on that, on the points that Rajendra was saying beforehand.
Kind of
and Fatih, yes,
yeah.
Go.
Because I agree with what you say about maybe the danger of the subsidy discussion, and it reminds me of a parallel situation in the mobile industry, where you probably heard Hans Vestberg this morning talking about today we have more than 6.5 billion mobile subscriptions around the world, and by 2019 it'll be about 85% of the population having access to mobile communication, and that was not done on subsidies. That was done on economies of scale and global standards. And I think that the benefits that have been achieved, whether you look at healthcare, whether you look at education, whether you look at ability to just establish a livelihood when you have access to communications in Africa, in so many parts of the world. We've been 100 years in Africa and looking at how to bring communications out to the rural areas. And I think that's where, so the first part was the parallel to also the discussion around the digital divide. That's what the energy access conversation reminds me about a little bit, but it's also a dependency between the sectors, because we're working with education, secondary education programs for girls in Africa, but we are so dependent in the most remote areas, in the poorest of the poor areas, we're dependent on the access to electricity, as is the whole community. So in order to, bring there's still 1 in 6 people on the earth that don't have access to internet, and that is creating an inequality in and of itself. But in order to bring them online, we have to solve the power challenge, and that's reducing the gap in two parallel ways, but that are so interdependent. So, but again, I don't know if I believe in just the subsidy idea, because I don't know that you're going to get scale. You can get a lot of small scale pilots that can contribute in any way, but how do you scale that? And then when you do scale it, how do you decouple the growth? There was a woman from London School of Economics, Carlotta Perez, that we had been working with for many years, who said, if the developing world comes up to the same standard of living as Western Europe or North America or wherever, by 2050 we would need 7 planets to sustain that. So at the same time, you have to reduce the gap in equity, whether it's energy, whether it's access to information, but you have to decouple the economics from the negative impacts. So it's kind of an enormous challenge.
To find the balance there.
Yeah.
Not only developing countries use energy more efficiently, but the OECD countries, rich countries, should use less energy as well. So we should put in a balance there.
And that is the benefit and the great hope, if you like, of technology and the science behind the development of some of these new technologies. Today, with some of the companies that I work with that are delivering these solutions, whether completely unsubsidized or some of them with some smart subsidy, you can do so much now with just even a 1 or 2 watt super bright LED that before we needed a 50 watt or 100 watt incandescent bulb. So, with a lot of the ways that we are seeing now with tablets and smaller devices, we can stream television. It used to be sort of, television required so many watts. Now, in fact, you have televisions that are color that are 12 watts. So even with a very, very small generation system, you can do an awful lot with it. So it's not just about how many kilowatt hours are we providing or consuming, it's about also how we can be using the best of innovation and technology to provide the solutions and provide the services that people want, but doing it in a way that's very efficient.
So how do you get somebody on your energy escalator? Let's talk about financing a bit. How do you start somebody off? Either of you.
Well, I would say that everybody's on the energy escalator. It's just that they may be on the first step and it may not be moving up very fast. As I mentioned this morning, the current kerosene lighting market is something approaching $37 billion per year. And it's being increasingly recognized, in fact, that you can switch out the use of kerosene lighting as a first step on the energy escalator. Not to say it's the end rung or ladder, but as a first step, you can help to switch out from kerosene lighting to improved lighting solutions. In fact, Kenya, from a political standpoint, declared itself a kerosene-free country from 2018. I hope they get there. But there's a recognition increasingly, in fact, that there are solutions, and either through providing the savings from not spending every month on kerosene and candles, or as was mentioned, with some either prepaid solutions or what's called pay-as-you-go, small cash outlays, you can basically pay using the same cash that you were using for kerosene lighting for these improved solutions. Now that sounds great, and the sector has been developing. I do want to provide a caveat, which is really for the companies, which is we are seeing there's tremendous improvement in quality. One of the areas I still think that we need to get better is making sure that you have the appropriate after-sales service for those solutions once they're in the communities. So again, pretty much standard private sector supply chains, developing the supply chains, making sure that if you have a warranty, that you stand by it. Because I think when you can only afford to pay for that solution once, you want to make sure that you're really getting a quality solution.
Yeah, so the business model of Azuri, the company I mentioned earlier, is definitely to try and offer a like-for-like replacement. So people are already spending on a weekly basis for kerosene, and the idea would be to charge them less, so they're actually saving money immediately, but they still just have to pay on a weekly basis. But to be able to make that business model work, you need the network there in the country of trusted people who trust each other to supply the equipment, to sell the scratch cards, and so forth. And I think it takes time to build up those networks.
Okay. Now, we would very much like to invite audience questions. So please put up your hand if you have questions. There's one up here. Could the microphone find that person?
I have a question for International Energy Agency and also Sustainable Energy for All. that there are many business models that go on, and it's not only technology that's important to reach energy security for all, it's also innovation on the ground. So it's very important to document that what works and what does not work. Just to take an example of cook stoves, that we know by last 50 years, only improving the efficiency of cook stove does not mean that people are going to use. There is almost no focus on renewable and reliable fuel supply along with the cook stove. So do you see, or in your organization, do you emphasize on documenting and spreading the news to the new startups for the documenting of what works and what does not work?
You want to go first?
Go.
Okay. I mean, we as an organization, our main task was, I should say, past tense, 10 years ago, to bring this issue as a part of the international energy debate, and we stayed there, and we think we have been successful on that. But now, of course, we look at different cases. First of all, I should say that there are different success stories in different countries. It changed so much depending on the economic environment, cultural environment, and the political situation in the country. I gave you the issue of example of China. China has a different economic model, and Chinese government took the decision and they went frontal. Without looking at the cost and benefit, they brought electricity to 500 million people. But now, in terms of cooking, there are different models there. Shall we go for LPG? Shall we improve the efficiency? Shall we go to improve biomass? There are different policies. What we do is we look at successful stories and say, these are the success stories, and other countries can only get the inspiration from them. But to take exactly the same model in your country may not be working. So this is therefore, it will be very difficult, unlike oil and gas and other energy sources, it will be very difficult to make copy and paste in this context.
One of the things, to speak to the clean cooking side, you're absolutely right, not all cooking solutions are equal. And there's an initiative called the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stove that is working on exactly this issue, which is looking not only at more efficient cook stoves because they've been around for a long time, but those that truly deliver the health benefits in terms of reduction in smoke and bringing about the health improvements that we spoke about, reducing respiratory illnesses. And part of the challenge there is technological, which is bringing the best solutions to the market. Part of it is developing those market mechanisms so you can actually get them available to the households in those communities. And then part of it is also about consumer behavior, which is nobody wants to be told that they can't cook in a certain way. So it's also looking at the cultural adaptation. It's looking at, is this solution relevant in this particular context? Is it affordable? Is it something that people want to use? So you have to come at it from a variety of different perspectives. It's not only, have we got the actual solution, but it's then how it's utilized in that local context.
Thank you. Another question. Yep, there's one just here.
About the last issue, you haven't mentioned solar cooking, which is also a possibility. And they, for example, in Ladakh in India, they are using it. But my real question is, if we get rid of all armies in the world, we can give people on the globe electricity, fresh water, and wastewater treatment. We can
It's a very optimistic thought. I guess that's a little bit beyond the scope of this panel, unless anybody wants to comment on the solar cooking aspect.
Well, I have great sympathy with the view that the military costs a lot of money. And when I was interviewed for the job of Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department of Energy in London, and I was asked, why do you want this job? I said, it's because I'm a pacifist, and I'm concerned that the future, as we enter shortages of fuels, possibly of some types, and climate change conflict, it is a future that we really want to avoid. So that's why I'm doing this job.
More questions? Over here.
Thank you. I was just okay. Let me start over. I often hear the words cost and money being mentioned very often, and I was just curious if any one of you have ever heard of the resource-based economy model and what your thoughts about that are, if you ever heard about it, and also if money wasn't an obstacle, if money wasn't a part of the problem at all, how would you go about creating solutions to help people just by realizing, by measuring and realizing how much resources actually are available for everyone? Thank you.
Okay.
It's tough questions coming in, but I have a comment on that. I was thinking back what you started with, David, about talking about the, how do you set up, I forget what you called your ladder, but how do you set up the whole value chain along the step of the way and try to get it profitable? And I think there are a lot of, and I know that's not exactly what was being asked, but I think there's a parallel there because in order to make things more cost efficient and take away the cost argument, if you will, at least to some extent, would be to look at how to leverage. I mean, when you started setting up this whole infrastructure and all these scratch tickets and all these different things along the way, that just reminds me again of the mobile industry, which I know so well, and thinking about just use the cell phones. I mean, they have them anyway, right? So, I mean, take away some of the cost burden there, use your cell phone to charge for and pay for small amounts of electricity. It's already happening in some markets. I mean, we have been looking for years at ways to, even in the most remote village, if we build a tower and power that on wind or solar, can we provide access to electricity to the community by taking the excess power from the cell phone tower? And we did that in some cases in Kenya, where we were, I mean, someone earlier on one of the panels talked about the need, to get the vaccines and refrigeration, and we did that. We just drew the cables down from the cell tower, linked it to the vaccine and the health clinic. And so I think that rather than just looking at the energy sector, here's the energy sector, here's the telecom sector, here's transportation or whatever, and looking at them so independently, start looking, across the sector for gains on the economics and economies of scale.
I think the question, just to add on that, is a matter of money. I think it's not a matter of money. It is, according to our analysis, to bring modern energy services to solving these two hallmarks, which means electricity access and clean cooking facilities. We spend each year, we need to spend about 50 billion, 49 exactly, $billion. This compares with the, for example, each year we make about oil and gas upstream investments about 600 billion US dollar. This is an issue of not the money, but the allocation of money, given the whether or not this is a priority for the human beings or not. Therefore, it is more than the cost, it is the allocation of the cost and where you take the priorities.
I'd like to just speak to that particularly because I work with a network of about 1,500 energy entrepreneurs that are delivering energy solutions in a range of developing countries and a range of technologies and approaches, and it's exactly that. I hear so many times that people say, well, it's not a question of the money, we have the money's there. But in fact, it is, a lot of these entrepreneurs speak about the challenges that they still have in getting the right access to the working capital. It is a question, you so rightly talked about the use of M-Pesa in Kenya for paying for some of these services, but that's not, that mobile money service is not yet available widely in many other markets. In some it is, but the mechanism is also needed to be there for the consumers. If you're buying an energy asset, if you're buying a solar home system, How do you pay for it as a consumer? Are you able to get a loan from your local bank to actually pay for it? Are the terms right? Are they affordable for you as a household? So there's a huge financing issue. It's not so much about whether the dollars exist globally to do it, but how is that capital being utilized? Is it available for the companies, the entrepreneurs who are delivering these solutions?
Let me just slightly differ on that. I want to give one example. There is one African country whose name I will not give. About 60 million, about half of this country, has no access to energy services. And this is an oil and gas rich African country. And we have calculated, coming to the allocation of the resources, if this country would spend it is oil and gas export revenues, not 6%, only 0.6% of this oil and gas export revenues to energy access, this problem would have been solved. 60 million people have access to the energy. Only 0.6, not even 1%. So this is therefore, it is important to look at in that context, the priorities, governance, and the government programs point of view as well.
I wanted to respond to the second question. If money was not a problem, what would you do? We've been working on a project in the Department of Energy and Climate Change called the 2050 Calculator, which initially was a tool to help people answer that question for the UK. So it was a physics and engineering-based tool that just said, what could you do? Because if money weren't a problem, would that actually make it easy to power a country like the UK? Well, some people would still be anti-wind farm or anti-nuclear, or they'd say, leave my lifestyle alone. And so we made a tool to try and help people have constructive conversations based on the laws of physics and the realities of engineering. And we're now making national calculators with other countries. We're helping developing countries especially to make their own calculators that describe what is possible. And because some people do care about costs, and because in fact money is an issue, we do include in these calculators estimates of the costs of different pathways as well. So then we use these tools as ways of helping people have constructive conversations and discuss the trade-offs between different options. For example, for a European country, how much lifestyle change are you willing to have in order to energy reduction, and how much do you want it to be done by technology change, and which technology changes and which lifestyle changes, and okay, then your lifestyle needs this much energy. Where do you want it to come from? Bioenergy, nuclear, wind, and it visualizes those trade-offs. And China has recently published its own calculator, as has Taiwan. And we're now working on a global calculator, which will be a tool in which you can adjust the lifestyle and demands of the whole world and the supply choices, and then see what the climate change consequences are of that set of choices. So that'll be coming out in the next 12 months.
Thank you. We have a question from the online audience.
We have a question on Twitter from Cambridge, UK, asking what is the scope of energy access actually? Do we expect everyone to have ultimately to match the consumption seen in developed countries, also in the developing countries?
So that was in a way where we started, and but it's still worth revisiting. I mean, what are we aiming for? What's our ambition?
I would say one of the areas that we're aiming for, we're looking at from a development standpoint, as we're looking beyond the Millennium Development Goals and towards what happens in 2015, and we're talking about sustainable development goals, and we're looking at whether or not we could have sustainable energy for all as one of the sustainable development goals, and looking within that at some of the indicators of what we would like to see. And certainly from the millions of deaths that we see per year now from the effects of the smoke and the emissions from kerosene-based lighting and from these rudimentary cooking solutions that in fact harm people's health, we would like to see ideally a complete elimination of any deaths as a result of those types of cooking and lighting, or at least getting down to from where we are today to at least halving the number of deaths from that indoor air pollution. The World Health Organization is looking at this in great depth right now. And so, I think rather than defining it in a sort of esoteric term about kilowatt hours, we really need to be looking at it from the standpoint of benefits to people.
I'd say the goal is clean energy cheaper than coal. And I think it is important to bring in some numbers. Earlier we saw the picture of the solar panel on the roof, and that's been put there without subsidy, and people might come away with the impression, oh, there's no need for any subsidy then, solar power is already cheap enough. But actually that little panel, delivering a very valuable service, is delivering it at quite a high cost per kilowatt hour. And I'd like to give you an example to think about this. Have you ever bought a AA battery, and did you pay about $1 for it? And did you think about the cost per kilowatt hour you were paying there? Because inside that battery, there's 1 watt hour of energy. It gives you 1 volt, 1 amp of current for about 1 hour, which is 1 watt hour. That means you were paying $1,000 per kilowatt hour for that battery. And that's, you bought it rationally because it's a valuable service that you get. It makes you able to go off grid with your little AA battery. But so when they pay for that little panel on their roof through the weekly scratch card payments or whatever it is, they're not paying a price that is cheap compared to the price of coal or European electricity. Here, electricity costs 15 cents a kilowatt hour or something like that. And in the UK, we've recently had a big political rumpus because the price was driven up by an extra 8% by some eco obligations and tariffs and so forth. And some of those tariffs have been removed to bring back the cost from 16 cents per kilowatt hour back to 15 cents per kilowatt hour. What they were probably paying in India and Africa for that little solar panel, if you were to work it out and say, what are they paying per kilowatt hour? I expect it's going to be something like 100 or 200 cents per kilowatt hour is what they're actually paying. If we want them to really start living like Europeans and to have that quality of life that we enjoy, the goal has to be clean energy cheaper than coal, and that will also solve climate change at the same time.
Yeah, I don't think it's about living like Europeans, actually. I think for me, the whole issue of energy access is more just about inclusion. You know, it's financial inclusion, it's social inclusion, it's digital inclusion. It's about, you know, having the fundamental rights to so many things like access and education and the right to earn a living. And, you know, so for me, this whole energy access discussion is really about equity and inclusion and maybe not saying, I don't know, there is a gap, of course, we talked about that earlier, between the developed and the developing world, but it's about closing the gap, but bringing people into, you know, the society in the right way.
So just let me link this discussion with the climate change. And also choice of fuel, choice of technology. Now, when we have pushed this agenda, the agenda of the energy access, many of our governments, many people told us, you are saying energy access to 1.3 billion people, under than 2.6 billion people, but we have already a big problem of climate change. If they have access to energy, and it is already a very difficult solution, climate change problem will be even much worse to be solved. So this was an argument that some people put forward, and we analyzed the situation. And I can tell you what the result is. Even if all these people would have access to energy in the context of what we just mentioned in terms of lighting and some productive means and the others, global CO2 emissions in 2035, in 20 years of time, will increase only about 0.8%, almost nothing, peanuts. Even if they follow the energy demand patterns that the OECD countries follow up to now. A bit of fossil fuels, then renewables here, the coal here, gas there. Only 0.9%. Why? Here the important number is not 1.3 billion, but how much energy they use, the amount of energy they use. Therefore, the argument of energy excess would aggravate the problem of climate change is completely wrong. Therefore, it is of course very good if those people in the Africa and elsewhere would choose to go for renewable energies, but we shouldn't patronize them to tell them, do this or that. in order to clean up our cumulative emissions there, or what China is doing, what others are doing today. So this is, I think, something that we need to keep in mind, that the cause of climate change is and never will be the energy access efforts of the developing nations.
And just to follow up on that, I mean, that's to 2035, when 1.3 billion people are using energy, but perhaps not that much energy. And then as you project out from that, and energy usage presumably increases greatly, is the argument that even if they're using coal substantially up till 2035, renewables will be also coming along at the same time. And so as that level increases, you're going to be able to get rid of the fossil fuels. Is that the idea?
Of course, if they all go for coal, this is not a good news, and I don't think that they will go for coal. For many off-grid solutions in the rural area, the renewable energies make economic sense. But for the urban, I mentioned China, and today India, about more than 300 million people have no access to electricity in India. How can we say Indians don't use coal, only go for solar and wind? It will be, I believe personally, and I represent the rich countries, OECD countries, I would feel uncomfortable to tell them don't use coal. Then 300 million people have no access to electricity. So therefore, they should choose what they want, but we should, globally, we should find the mechanisms to make them go for more sustainable choices, not to put the stick on the Indians to go for the futures that we wanted to see.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Okay, we are pretty much out of time, so I just wonder whether anybody had any points they wanted to pick up on that they felt were left hanging. No need to if you don't want to, but last chance.
I just wanted to answer the question on solar cooking, because we didn't get to that, and just to say certainly it's a part of the mix for certain contexts, but there's no silver bullet solution. In my own kitchen at home, I use multiple different solutions. I've been into many households in India and across different countries where, in fact, they use multiple solutions. Part of it is affordability. Part of it is using LPG when the family is coming to impress the family. There's a range of different solutions, and you really have to look at giving choices to families, giving choices to consumers. And I think it's not imposing an A or B or C. It's really about providing that customer choice.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Well, okay, thank you to all of you and to the audience. It's been a fascinating panel. Thank you very much indeed. There is now a coffee break for around about 20 minutes.